Hi from Italy. I will talk about
The Beatles! The Rolling Stones!
Thank you, Ed Sullivan. In 1966, Italian singer Gianni Morandi recorded a song about a boy who loved the Beatles and the Rolling Stones. No, at the time one loved the Beatles or the Rolling Stones. Two groups that bring rock and roll towards more important forms. The Beatles on a more cultured and classicist level, thanks to George Martin too. The Stones linked to the blues. After the early lineup change by Pete Best and by Ian Stewart, it was George Harrison, after attending a performance at the Crawdaddy Club in Richmond, to suggest the Stones to Dick Rowe, the man from Decca who rejected the Silver Beatles. The manager, Andrew Loog Oldham, gives them a transgressive look and bets everything on a rebellious image, because the only way to challenge the Beatles was not to be like them. But we know that Epstein imposed the change in look and behavior, from teddy boys to young gentlemen, and Lennon never forgave himself the compromise. First Stones record was a cover, so Oldham, who had worked for the Beatles, asked to John and Paul a song for the second single. At the Delane Lee studio, John and Paul play I Wanna Be Your Man, and when Brian Jones points out that the song is incomplete, John invents the refrain in a few seconds. In the official discography, the two bands also share money. 1965 is the turning point. The Stones say in people's faces, "I can get no satisfaction," together with the cry of Lennon, "Help," and the anger of The Who, "My Generation." Shortly after Revolver, the Stones release Aftermath, only Jagger and Richards songs. Brian Jones begins to use exotic instruments, sitar, dulcimer on Lady Jane, and on June he joins the crazy recording session of Yellow Submarine. He sings in the chorus and produces the sound effects. On February, Mick, Keith and Marianne Faithfull appear in A Day in the Life promo, and at the filming of All You Need Is Love on June 25. And on August 26, Brian, Mick and Marianne again leave by train with the Beatles for Maharishi Conference in Bangor. Also, in that fantastic year, a remote dialogue on the album covers begins. On Sgt. Pepper, there's a doll with the words "Welcome the Rolling Stones." 1967 starts very well with Let's Spend the Night Together and Ruby Tuesday. But in February, Keith and Mick are arrested. Sergeant Norman Pilcher, Semolino Pilcher, is the policeman who arrested Mick and Keith. Brian Jones, John and Yoko, and then George a few months later. John and Paul sing in the ironic "We Love You," a gesture of solidarity that makes the news around the world. On June, Paul invites Brian Jones to Abbey Road. He records a sax solo on "You Know My Name," released on the B-side of Let It Be. This is a real event, 1 year before the famous Eric Clapton session for While My Guitar Gently Weeps. So we come to the Summer of Love. But Rolling Stone records are not on the same level with Pepper. Procolarum, Pink Floyd, Moody Blues. Between the buttons is too Beatlesque, and their satanic majestic request is similar to Pepper, even in the photo shot by the same photographer, Michael Cooper. On the cover, there is a photo of each Beatle. A moment of revenge for the Rolling Stones. They return to their roots. Jumpin' Jack Flash is at the top. In Beggar's Banquet, they sing Street Fighting Man next to the revolution, while Lennon is full of doubts, out, in. And on December, John and Yoko, dressed as a juggler and a witch, join the Stones on television show Rock and Roll Circus. John plays Air Blues with Eric Clapton and Keith Richards on bass. It's the first time that John performs without his Beatles, and he does with his bitter rivals. In the beginning, Brian Jones was the face of the Stones, but he was pushed aside and began playing exotic instruments just like Harrison and getting closer with the Beatles. Maybe he was seriously thinking of becoming the fifth Beatle. Drug problems forces him to leave the band, but on July the 3rd he drowns in his swimming pool and Harrison says sweet words for him. After Epstein's death, Jagger convinces John, George and Ringo to call the Shark, Alan Klein, as their manager. It's the end of the Beatles. The next album is Let It Bleed, this time the title outrages the Beatles. In 1973, Mick sings in Do You Wanna Dance for Lennon's album Rock and Roll, and John produced Too Many Cooks for Mick. Ron Wood, who was Pattie Boyd's lover before Clapton, plays on Harrison's album Dark Horse and writes with George Far East Man. Ron also plays on Ringo's album Stop and Smell the Roses with Keith Richards in the backing vocals, and writes with Ringo That Giveaway. George plays slide guitar on a Bill Wyman album, and Bill records a Taxman version for his album Just for a Thrill. In the end, the link between Paul and Keith in the film saga with Johnny Depp. Keith plays the role of Captain Edward Teague, Jack Sparrow's father. In the fifth episode, Paul is Jack Teague, much less believable. In 1988, the Beatles were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Mick Jagger presented them on stage, joining George, Ringo, Bruce Springsteen and Bob Dylan to sing I Saw Her Standing There. Paul claims to have written the triple riff to create something similar to Satisfaction. Jagger was crazy for I Feel Fine. John wrote And Your Bird Can Sing in response to Mick, who was too pleased with Satisfaction's success. Dig a Pony was a direct attack. I roll a stony, well you can imitate everyone you know. And this led to Let It Bleed. In the 60s, everyone compared songs, sound, look, and instrumental abilities. Do we wanna play this game again? They came from very different cultures. Charlie from Jets. Ringo trained in Liverpool dance halls. Watts boasts the obsessive percussion on Satisfaction and The Last Time. Ringo is the beat rhythm inventor, able to color difficult John songs, Rain, Tomorrow Never Knows, A Day in the Life, Ticket to Ride. With all due respect to Bill, it is futile to answer, but that goes for almost all bass players, right? George was the only soloist. Keith and Brian used a style in which they played rhythm and solo together. But neither George nor Keith were real guitar heroes like Clapton or Hendrix. In the Beatles, the vocalists were John and Paul, but George and Ringo had their spaces too. In the Stones, Mick is the only lead voice, and there are no choral parts, fundamental for the Beatles. Paul has a great variety of tones. John has maybe one of the most beautiful voices ever. Mick has invented the rock voice, an original tone with a great extension. Only in Hamburg the Beatles makshaw. Mick is a true stage animal. He has an ability to rule the audience that will only be surpassed by Freddie Mercury and Michael Jackson. To posterity they are just sentence, said Alessandro Manzoni. But we know the answer.